Hello everyone, nice to see you all. So I'm going to be talking about the interpretation of survey measures in which people are asked for a percentage chance that something will occur. And the thesis here is that when you get those data, it can be a mistake to take them at face value. There can be systematic biases in the way people map their beliefs onto a reported percentage scale. And the first indication that I saw of this was looking at questions from surveys that ask representative samples about their survival beliefs. And I compared English and Irish samples, so you might think that these are quite similar people, but it turns out that when you ask Irish people what's the percent chance that you'll live for at least another decade, you get over 30% of them saying 100%, implying it is certain that they will live for another decade. Whereas English people, when asked that same question, are far more reticent to endorse a figure of 100%, and you get about 6% of them saying that they'll live, there's a 100% chance that they'll live another decade. And so the research question that I'm going to tease through today is whether that whopping great difference in the likelihood of reporting 100% into these survival questions is a difference of beliefs. Is it actually that Irish people are so much more optimistic about their survival than English people? Or is this something more in the space of a survey artifact, where when Irish people say 100%, what they really mean is, sure, I suppose so. It's a high probability, and 100% is a high probability. So the reason that it matters to unpick those two mechanisms is that beliefs will inform behavior, and so in the survival context, they'll inform things like saving for retirement, how you choose to take your retirement wealth, and when you choose to retire. And more generally, there's a lot of expectations data that asks people to report their expectations in the form of a percentage, and understanding what people mean by those percentages can be useful to interpreting the data that we get back and extracting greater signal from those survey data. Because if we can identify responses that are pure noise, or even worse, that are systematically biased, then we can retrieve a more meaningful measure of the beliefs that we care about. So to do this, I look to the SHARE survey, which asks people from 15 countries across Europe the very same question about their survival beliefs. And as a first shot on this, I'll show you that again, across these 15 countries, the Irish are an outlier. So a quarter of them report a 100% chance that they'll live a further decade. And that contrasts with, at the other end of the spectrum, we have just 5% of Czech people saying that there's a 100% chance that they'll live another decade. And all the other countries are in that 5 to 25% space. And I'm going to call this 5% in Czech versus 25% of the Irish population. I'm going to call that variable propensity 100. That's the propensity of a population to report that there's a 100% chance that they'll survive a further decade. And I'm going to use that measure to predict responses to an entirely independent question. So a second useful feature of the SHARE survey is that at the end of its expectations module, it asks these two questions that get at the same concept, but with reverse framing. So the first question people are asked is, what are the chances that 5 years from now, your standard of living will be better than it is today? And the next question is the reverse. 5 years from now, what's the percent chance that your standard of living will be worse? And logically, anyone who responds 100% to one of these questions must imply a 0% chance of the alternate question. And what I'm going to be looking for is violations of that. And my prediction is, if you come from a country where people are pretty loose with their understanding of 100%, or with what they mean by 100%, then you'll see contradictions whereby they'll say, sure, there's 100% I'll be better off, and there's maybe a 4% chance I'll be worse off. And so my outcome variable here is that binary indicator did you contradict yourself by saying there's a 100% chance of being better off and also report a positive chance of being worse off? And I'm saying that what predicts that is not your response to the survival question, but your compatriots' response to that survival question. If you happen to come from a country where the rest of your population reports that there's a 100% chance of living a further decade and are highly likely to report that there's a 100% chance of living a further decade, you yourself will be more likely to make this contradiction. So that's the hypothesis. It's pre-registered, and that's what comes out in the data. And the nice thing about this share survey is that it allows to control for other things that might be driving that contradiction. So maybe it's numeracy. Well, share collects data on numeracy, and we can rule out that it's just that certain populations or certain individuals are bad at mathematics. Controlling for numeracy doesn't change this effect. And similarly, we can average the better and worse outcomes to come to a measure of optimism for each respondent to see, is it optimism that's driving those contradictions? Controlling for that does not knock out the effect of this propensity 100 variable. And so what we infer from this is that there look to be conversational norms within a country whereby 100% means something other than what statisticians understand 100% to mean. The Irish are fast and loose, the Czechs more punctilious about what's meant by 100%. So that's the first result of this paper, that when you see 100% reported by a survey respondent, that can be used to mean something not entirely meaningless, is that there is a high probability, but it's not certainty, and that differs across cultures. But the other insight from this is that if people are using 100% to encompass something in the range, let's say 95 to 100%, then that 100% measure must squeeze the rest of the distribution so that there is no longer a linear mapping from people's probabilistic beliefs onto that percentage scale. So reports in the range 0 to 99% must represent probabilities that are less than in the range of 0 to 0.99 probability. And there's some supporting evidence on this point. Justin Ellie and co-authors did an experiment in the Health and Retirement Study in the United States, where they followed up the initial percentage that people reported of getting amnesia by asking them, that might have been a rounded number, how about you give us a more exact rendering of your answer? And when they followed up, they found that the initial answers were not merely noisy manifestations of the more exact answer, but in the blue line up here, they found the initial answer was flatter. It was closer to 50%, implying that people whose beliefs were very positive, those people were likely to understate their percentage in that initial question. And people whose beliefs were very negative, they were likely to overstate their beliefs when answering on a percentage scale. So you get this compression of reports relative to the beliefs that people hold. And I'm going to explore one of the implications of that compression of reports relative to the beliefs that people hold. And it concerns a widely reported gender difference in survival beliefs, whereby women are perceived to be more pessimistic than men. And the reason for that is, when you look at the data, you see the average woman reports a survival probability that's 2.5 percentage points lower than what's given by objective life tables, whereas the average man reports a probability that's 2.9 percentage points higher than what's given by life tables. So that 5.4 percentage point gap is interpreted to be a gap in the optimism of men and women regarding their survival. But if we go back to this curvature in the reporting of functions, there's a difference between women and men that's really germane to that. It's that women generally live longer than men. And so if you ask both groups about living to, let's say, age 95, women are more likely to live to age 95.
And given that they're being asked about a higher probability event, what we've just seen, higher probability events are likely to be underreported relative to lower probability events. So women are more likely to underreport their survival beliefs than are men. So the more precise test of this is, let's take a mortality outcome that's identical across men and women and see, in that context, is there a difference in optimism across men and women? And as it happens, the Health and Retirement Study gives us nice data on that, because men age 55 who are asked about surviving to age 85, they had a 43.8% chance of living to that age on average. And as it happens, a 43.8% chance is exactly the same that female respondents age 79 have of living to the target age they were asked about, which is 90. So as a first test, is there a difference across males and females in this reported probability of living to an objective probability that's given at 43.8%? And the answer to that is no. When you do that analysis, you find no gender difference. And this is a small sample. You'd want to see this replicated more robustly. And so the way to do that is, let's control in our analysis for that objective probability. So in this table, model 1 here is the standard analysis that's led people to interpret females to be more pessimistic than males. It's looking at this error in the average woman's forecast relative to what's given by life tables, and it finds that that error is 5 percentage points lower than the error made by males. Model 2 includes the objective survival probability given by life tables as a control variable. So when men and women are like for like forecasting the same survival outcome, is there a gender difference when that survival outcome has an identical probability? And you can see in model 2 that gender difference entirely disappears. No difference across males and females. You'll have seen earlier when I showed you the share question that asks about the age, the survival probability. There's a range of ages that respondents are asked about. And the age that you're asked about increases as you yourself age. And a consequence of that is that younger people are asked about higher probability events, living to age 75 or 85, than are older people. Older people are asked about living to age 100, 105. And so again, with curvature in the reporting function, you would expect that there would be specious age effects showing up also. What you'd expect is that younger people will look more pessimistic because they're understating their survival probabilities relative to their beliefs, and older people will look more optimistic. And again, the same analysis finds, by controlling for the objective probability that people are estimating, or their expected likelihood of living to the age that they're asked about, the age effect that's been reported in the literature entirely disappears. And this is interesting. The literature has been taking these demographic differences at face value and has been making policy recommendations on that basis. So, for example, telling people when it comes to retirement to pay attention to their life expectancy on the belief that younger people are misinformed about their life expectancy. What these data are saying is younger people may not be pessimistic about their life expectancy, but what's certainly the case is that they appear to be pessimistic about their life expectancy because the reports of the percentage chance of living to a given age understate their beliefs. And I replicated the results that I've just shown from the Health and Retirement Study in the United States in an Irish sample. And again, there you find that the negative effect of being female disappears and in fact becomes moderately positive in the Irish sample. And similarly, the age effects are largely wiped out, though for males, there looks to be a slight negative bias in survival beliefs as you age, so a flipping of the sign. I wouldn't put much weight on the reversal of the sign, But certainly the story here is that the literature has misinterpreted the data as signaling beliefs, where in fact it's signaling a bias in reports. And that's important in this domain of survival beliefs, but it's important more generally because in general context, let me back up and say, this is not just about survival beliefs, these are used in inflation measures also. And I've been doing work, thankfully the survey of consumer expectations asks people to report both by will there be inflation or deflation, and also asking what's the percentage chance inflation will fall within certain brackets. And so you can see, are there respondents who contradict themselves by saying there will be deflation and also imply that there will be inflation? And if you see that, those respondents look noisy and look as though they're misreporting on one of those measures. And if you take those respondents out of the sample, what you find is the remaining sample better forecast the positive shock to inflation that we've just witnessed in 2021. So big picture, understanding the reporting of percentages and the biases that can enter that gives us this means to tap in to retrieve greater signal from what is noisy and sometimes biased data. So I'll stop there and I welcome any questions.
We got some questions.
I have two quick questions. So first question is in your positive or negative outlook for your life, how about people who think the life's going to be the same? So then if it doesn't add up to 100, or if it exactly adds up to 100, you're missing a big chunk, which would then drive you above 100. Have you done anything on that? And the second question I have is on these gender differences. When you did the comparison between the 55-year-old male and the 75-year-old female, don't you have both the age effect happening and the gender effect? Could you explain whether they cancel each other out or at the same direction?
Yeah, so thanks for those questions. On the first one, the contradiction is only a contradiction if it's reporting a 100% chance of being better off. And yeah, that would preclude that there's any chance of being the same or worse off. So it would not be a contradiction to say there's a 0% chance of being better off and some positive, or and a 0% chance of being worse off. So that's how I deal with those people. And on your second question,
that was the age effect versus the gender effect.
Yeah, thank you. The controlling for target age and for the objective life expectancy is the way I deal with that, where we're taking everyone at this moment in time. And because there are discontinuities in the target age that people are asked about, we can exploit those discontinuities to pick up a cohort effect more generally, or to get that age effect which you'd expect not to be discontinuous. So that's the assumption there. Thank you.
Any more questions? There was another question.
Thank you. Nice presentation. I was wondering if you ever investigated if there is an impact about the statistical literacy that a person might have on accurately doing these probabilistic estimates of how long they're going to live or something like that.
So the closest I've come to looking at that are these numeracy measures, which typically ask people questions along the lines of, if you had $5 and you got an interest rate of 3%, what would that scale up to? Or in fact, they're not even that difficult, but they're trying to get into, do people understand percentages as an abstract concept and also in the real world, things like compound interest. And so it's not referred to as statistical literacy so much in the literature as far as I've seen it, but numeracy measures seem to pick that up.
Because if I think of myself, I might be able to give a probabilistic statement on something like a neutral topic, but I might be way off if it's about how long do you believe you're going to live for X amount of time. Might be as well overconfident, is more reflective, I hope, rather than correct testing.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's material to that is I've done an experiment in which I asked people, think of 100 people just like you in terms of genetics and lifestyle, how many of those people would still be alive by a given age? And that framing of the question is less vulnerable to biases than is the percentage chance one. And that might be explained that this percentage chance one is asking about me particularly, and defensive mechanisms come into play when asked about myself.
It's not so much a question as a reaction to say that it's not necessarily a defense mechanism. What differentiates reports about yourself is asymmetry of information. You know so much more about yourself and about why you'll never be in a car accident, or why you'll have a wonderful marriage and so on. So I don't think that it has anything to do with kind of ego protection or.
So the test in this experiment was, in fact, let's talk about this later because I'm conscious of other speakers' time, but I'm keen to pick that up with you. Thank you.
We do have a bit of time, actually.
Oh, yeah.
We don't have 20 minutes.
Okay. Well,
No, I mean, if you want to just run a bit more.
Yeah, I'll give it 2 more minutes. Thank you. So the experiment was asking some people about the probability of surviving to age 85 and randomly other people about being dead by age 85. So it should be that one group's is equal to the others, 100 minus the others. And for people who are asked for a percentage chance, that prediction was violated to a greater extent than for people who are asked about the frequency question of 100 people just like you in terms of genetic lifestyle. So that's the basis by which I claim that the frequency question is more valid, giving more meaningful measures of people's beliefs.
Any more questions? That should be the rule. We should shut them.
All right, cheers. Quick one. Yeah, okay. I'm, when I see probabilities that fail to add up to 1, I immediately think of fuzzy logic. Now, I know we've got a talk by somebody who knows about this elsewhere in the conference. I think Steve Morlich has a talk on fuzzy. I'm wondering if there's some interpretation of the Irish paradox in terms of, alternative realities, multi-valued truths, which I understand is kind of the basis of fuzzy logic. There isn't a truth, there's several of them. So when you kind of assign probabilities, they don't necessarily come out as in the classic form. I have no idea what I'm talking about, okay, but I do know that there may be some interpretation in that kind of framework. So it's just the thought that, think fuzzy logic.
Thank you for that.
Could that explain that?
As an Irishman, I feel flattered that you're ascribing this to some cosmic transcendence amongst the Irish people.
Yeah, I think alternative truths definitely pop up in various Irish social events for sure.
Any more questions? I'm not really suggesting we carry on for another 20 minutes, but if there is one, yeah.
My question is actually, is there a way to have some reference point in the sense that if you're saying that Irish people tend to use 100% of the time more often, is there a way to just use another objective question wherein we know the actual probabilities? And if they do say 100 a lot when it's, let's say, in fact it's 97, then we can kind of tease out whether the use of 100% is really like too much or it's really about beliefs.
So we are interested in people's beliefs, even if those beliefs are inaccurate or biased. And so trying to calibrate to an objective measure would get us some insight, but it may not get us what we want. We do want to know if people are over-optimistic or overly negative. And I guess from thinking back to the inflation result that I just spoke about, it seems triangulating on people's beliefs by asking various permutations of the same question is one way of getting people to articulate their beliefs in a meaningful way, or giving us a signal of what those beliefs are. So we could also ask people, what age do you think you will live to? And see if that corresponds. And so there's various different ways of asking the same question. And if we're seeing discrepancies across those, maybe we'd be less confident that that respondent knows what they're talking about. But if we see convergence across those, then we could put greater weight on that respondent as being somebody who has an understanding and a consistent belief.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's wrap it up there with David. And this is where I probably find out that the second speaker has arrived. Is the second speaker here? Akani, I think. All right, we haven't got the second speaker, so this is where we have a decision to make. Should we just charge on to the next one? So I'm going to get to you. We need to wire you up. Thank you, David. Oh, probably we
Thank
should
you.
thank David. Maximum value out of David there. Thank you.
Share the screen?
Yeah, we should be, I think we are sharing, but what we want to do is to hide that horrible menu at the top.
Okay.
Let's do that. Good to go. Are you all right?
Is it working? Okay, yeah. Yeah, this is working.
This is the third presentation.
Yeah, second and third. Hello, everyone. I'm Samone, and I'm a PhD student at the Norwegian School of Economics. I'm working on energy markets, which is a totally different topic than what you discussed today. Under supervision of Professor Jonas Andersen, I'm working and hopefully soon finish my third year. Today, okay, there's not low. Maybe the laptop.
Misbehaving. Is it right?
At that time, we didn't share the screen. Now it's.
Should we try again? What happens in here? That's working, is it? Yeah. So
Yeah.
It's all good there.
Yeah.
And we're doing that. Okay.
See. Yeah, now works. Thank you. This is the outline of my presentation today, and I'm going to introduce you to electricity market for those of you who don't know this market a bit. I give you an introduction to spikes and a few recent works, plus my research question that is built upon those. And the data we have used model and results. Okay.
Is it because I've hidden those meeting controls?
Maybe.
I thought I was being clever. Does it work now? Does it work now? Oh, it does that?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No problem. Okay. Electricity prices have some stylish facts that they show a very extreme volatility. Besides, they have some sort of clustering. It means that in some periods of time we have a low probability of spikes, and in some periods we have high probabilities. And also they occur in blocks of varied length that causes those to be a bit special. And you know, electricity is special in a sense that it's not storable, and the balance in power system should be maintained all the time. And also these kind of commodities usually have fat tails. They come with a very positive skewed distributions, which I will show you later. And also when we want to predict them, we observe autocorrelations, meaning that they are affected by previous prices And also, you know, demand in electricity market in short time is highly inelastic. So that's why it can result in supply curve shifts, because if for example, in a case that generators are exercising their power market, they power in the market, customers cannot change their demand rapidly. So the demand supply curve will shift and it will cause extreme prices. Besides, demand is highly affected by weather conditions, and in the case of extreme unexpected weather conditions, prices will go up, as we know, and besides, they have very seasonal behavior that we need to take into account weekly or monthly or even annually behaviors of electricity prices when we are going to predict them. So all of these features, besides spikes, that can be consequence of, for example, transmission congestion in the grid or generation outages, are interesting to study, and these kinds of features make studying spikes important. So I just want to tell you more about this importance. As NG and McCuller studied, they concluded that spikes can have adverse effect on parameter estimation and also forecast of volatility. Besides, if we have a good knowledge of future prices, generators can bid into the market strategically and also manage their assets optimally. In addition, retailers can buy electricity at lower prices. You know, for example, in a market like Australia, which is the operation is such that retailers buy electricity at spot prices, and they have to spot prices which are so volatile, and they have to sell it to the customers at fixed prices. So having a knowledge about future prices is really important. And as Christiansen and his colleagues mentioned, this these spikes, if are not predicted well, they can be detrimental. For example, in a retail company that, as I mentioned, a retailer that is not very flexible in operation and cannot make decisions in the pool market, a false positive forecast can be detrimental, because sometimes spikes are 100 times more than irregular prices. So these are our motivation to go to work on this a bit more. Besides considering these two quite recent works, one of them is by Christiansen and his colleagues. They have investigated an autoregressive conditional hazard model to estimate probability of spike occurrences, and they are considering even duration between spikes and also the size of exceeding above a threshold to be predictors of probability of spikes. And the study by Novotarsky and Veron was another kind of motivation for us to work more on this, but they have used real data, and they have used 9 models and made prediction intervals, made also comparisons, measured the accuracy of prediction intervals, but we are doing a simulation study. So the research question is, what is a reasonable measure of risk for a commodity like electricity? which usually shows a two regime or a two kind of component behavior. The answer is absolute variance is not a good measure, because if you consider a risk profile like which is normally distributed, and also consider a risk profile that the returns have both normally distributed standard and also value 100 with 2% probability. Even if the variance is the same, the risk profile has a big difference. So that's why we concluded that it's not going to be our risk measure, and we work on prediction intervals. Another question is, can we model spikes? Can we predict them? Are they random or not? So this is the data we have used. The data has been used, I think, in several other papers as well. This is a data of Global Energy Forecasting Competition 2014. And there are also total load and zonal load, but we are only taking the hourly zonal marginal prices. So you see those kind of spikes and seasonal behaviors, but for simplicity, we want to know, we want to use just 1 hour, and we took the average of all hours. As you see, from early morning till midnight, the average over each hour is determined, and we think that hour 10 is a normal observation to be used. So not 5 a.m., not 6 p.m., because they are very low or very high. We just want to be unbiased a bit in our research. So this is the zonal price hour 10. As you see, there are 1,082 observations. The spikes are clearly demonstrated here. And we had a very simple approach to compute spikes, and we considered every hour, every price that was more than mean plus 2 times standard deviation to be a spike, and it turned out that almost 5% of the observations are spikes. And you see the density function, which is positively skewed. Please keep in mind that plot, because later we want to show you how the simulation is working, and we get a quite good result. So I'm going to talk about the model we have used. And this is a model introduced by Wong and Lee, 2001, a logistic mixture autoregressive model. You see the cumulative distribution, which is conditional on historical data and also some covariates until time t. And we have these mixing proportions. Actually, logistic mixture model, or LMAX, is useful for time varying time series. It's quite flexible when we have non-constant mean and variance. So you see that this is residuals from each component. Actually, LMAX is consists of two Gaussian transfer functions, and these are residuals, not regressive, and also some covariates. This is the logistic function we are making use of, and as you see, if this Bernoulli variable is higher than alpha 1 with the which is computed from the logistic function, the simulated price is going to be in regime 1, otherwise it's going to be in regime 2. And for each component, we have the same procedure. I mean, this is Z1t, And also we have Z2T as well, because we have this Bernoulli variable for 2 components. Here we included some normally distributed random numbers, but there is the possibility to also include some water level, wind, if the data is available, or if anyone likes to. But here just some random numbers, and for each regime we are specifying some parameters. We assume that regime 1 is going to be the normal component, and the other one is the spiky one, and specified parameters so that they give us lower variance for this seasonal armor process and more volatile for AR2 process. And this is the result of simulation. As you see, the mean and variance are quite close. The behavior of spikes as well. We got almost the same percentage of spikes here too, and also you can observe autocorrelations and seasonal behaviors, I mean, in this simulated series. See, the density plot is also showing us a quite good result. Okay, so we have the simulation series, and now we want to make the prediction intervals. The assumption we are making is that we want to have a very ideal conditions, forecast errors are normally distributed, and residuals are uncorrelated. So we used 4 simple point forecast models and predicted 1 ahead forecasts based on these 4 methods. As you see, this is a naive method, and also we have a seasonal naive, AR1 and ARMA 1-1. So after 1,000 replications and with the sample size of 1,082, like the hour 10 length, we concluded that, okay, under 95% coverage probabilities are quite close, and yeah, in AR1 and ARMA 1-1 a bit higher, but AR1 and ARMA 1-1 show a narrower average length. You know, these are all mean over the whole 1,000 simulations. These are averages. And also in 99% level, these are a bit undersized, but again, AR1 and ARMA 1-1 have a narrower length, a bit closer to point forecasts. But in the case of 80%, we see that the spikes had caused some problems, because even though these 2 methods are working a bit better, but they are way off from 80% nominal level. So these are the results of the simulation studies, and further we are going to work on estimating optimal parameters of Elmark's model based on EM algorithm, which is in progress. We have built a log likelihood function, and we have tried to find optimal parameters, but still we don't get close parameter estimations to what we have specified in our data generating process. And also later, if we success in that, we can use these optimal parameters in our simulation specification and investigate these two models as well. We are still not sure if we can use forecasted covariates, or we can have actual demand. And then besides that hour 10, we want to compare peak and off-peak hours, and also other measures of evaluations. Here you have the references if you want to take a look, and thank you for your attention.
Any questions for Samini?
Thank you. Have you looked at the tail exponent of the distributions? Have you looked at the tail exponent of the distributions, and is it something that you can try to match with your simulations? You showed the density, and we saw that something was going on in the tail, but it was difficult to compare the empirical data and the...
Yeah, that's a good point actually, but I've not done that. No, but that's a good point. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? So I could just ask one. Why are you looking at intervals? Why are you looking at intervals?
Intervals.
Yes. Do you care about the lower bound of the interval? Do you really care about the upper?
Yeah. I think if they are narrow, then we are close to the point predictions, but if they're too wide, then you know, there's a trade-off between those two. Having a narrow prediction interval or a very wide, none of them are absolutely great.
What about looking at the full distribution? Why did you decide to look at intervals rather than just, you're in the simulation world, so could you just look at the whole distribution?
Yeah, you mean
when it comes to the evaluation?
Oh yeah, we will consider other measurements for their accuracy. It's just the beginning of not the beginning, I mean some simple methods to evaluate those, and we want to investigate unconditional coverages and some scores to see which one is working better. It's just a preliminary investigation.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions, comments from anyone? Okay, let's end it there. So thank you very much, Samini. Thank you. I doubt I won't use that because I'll probably break it. Right, where did I leave it? Whoa! Slow down. There we go. That works, doesn't it? All right, okay. I think I'm wired up. I'm last. My name's James Taylor, and that's where I'm based, about a mile in that direction, I think. Well, I'm not sure about it. And that's the title of the presentation. It's all about combining forecasts of probability distributions. Good motivation for combining, you're synthesizing information from different sources. With probability distribution forecasts, you've got a lot of information in that forecast. So yeah, there's a good literature on combining forecast and probability distributions, and I'm trying to contribute to that literature. First of all, a bit of background. Before I go any further, I should say that actually my version of combining is averaging. For simplicity in these slides, I'm just going to talk about averaging. Okay, well, I'm seeing a reference at the bottom of the slide, and at this point I should acknowledge those guys because I've pinched their little plots. Okay, so one approach, not my invention, to combining or averaging forecasts is vertical combining. And that's what's going on this slide. Top right, you got two in gray individual forecasts of the probability distribution. And what goes on with vertical combining is, as it seems to sort of show you, for a given value of X, you're going up and you're averaging the two values from each of those CDFs. You're averaging, I suppose, probabilities. So that's another way of referring to this game. Averaging probabilities, vertically averaging. And actually, you often get a little bit more insight by looking at the resulting density. Down the bottom there, well, if it wasn't obvious from the top, and I might have said, my little example here that I've stolen are a couple of Gaussian densities, a couple of Gaussian distributions with the same variance but different locations. And down the bottom there, you can see that actually the averaging has resulted in a bimodal distribution, bimodal density, and quite spread out. Hopefully I'll remember to come back to that issue. Okay, well, if you want to sort of see it in analytical expressions, there they are on the slide. The first one is for the distribution. What's going on? Well, you might be averaging K. In my little example here, K is equal to 2. So we're averaging distributions for a given value of X. If you differentiate the first expression, you end up with a density expression. What else to say about that? Yes, the density expression seems to be in terms of X, and it seems to be an arithmetic average. Just bear that in mind. Okay, so I need to fly the flag for this little paper down the bottom here by these guys, because they thought about this and thought, well, there is an alternative. And I don't think they were inventing this alternative, but they certainly were pointing it out to a lot of us for whom it just hadn't occurred that there's another way of doing this. This is the most popular approach to combining distributions, I think it's fair to say, but there is an alternative to combining vertically, and that's to combine horizontally. So same little example, those two Gaussian distributions up the top. What's going on here? Oh, for a given value of the CDF, alpha, say, you're coming across and you're looking to see what the corresponding values are of X. If you think about it, those would be the alpha quantiles. So what you're doing with this horizontal averaging, I suppose, is averaging quantiles. Okay, and those guys in that paper I mentioned a couple of times suggested that we average quantiles instead of averaging probabilities. You can see that the result is quite different to what I had at the bottom of the previous slide. A lot narrower, and if my memory serves me correctly, the density at the bottom of the previous slide was bimodal. So this is kind of an interesting idea, quite a contrast, averaging horizontally to vertically. If we've got any nerds in the house and want to see it in an analytical way, here we are, there's the expressions. The first expression is in terms of the distribution function. Inverse of the distribution function, I guess, is the quantile function. So I've already told you that what's going on this slide is averaging quantiles, and that's what the first expression is saying for the general case of K forecasters. Right, if you're interested in expression for the density, probably you want to differentiate the first expression with respect to, with respect to alpha. And you end up with that funny old thing for the density. What is it saying? Are people familiar with the harmonic average? Some people are, perhaps not everybody, but that's what we are producing here by this horizontal averaging. What we've ended up with is an expression where, by contrast with the previous slide where we had an arithmetic averaging of densities, here we've got a harmonic average. Harmonic average is something like the reciprocal of the average of the reciprocals. I think I got that right. Okay. But actually, you might look at that second expression and notice it's not a function of X. The density evaluated at its alpha quantile is a harmonic mean of the respective individual densities evaluated at their respective alpha quantiles. So that's a bit more messy than the previous slide. And I was looking at it and thinking, well, we've got arithmetic averaging, and here we've got harmonic averaging, and maybe there's other sorts of averaging. Can we come to something in between this vertical or horizontal combining? So it's time I reference those guys again. That was essentially the title of their paper. Should you do it that way or that way? And I kind of both loved and hated the paper. I loved it for the right reasons, and I hated it because I wish I'd written it. Seemed to be quite a nice idea to point that out. It seems very obvious when you think about it. Okay, anyway, my little attempt to contribute to this area is to say, well, maybe there is a third way. Sounds like New Labour or something. And you probably could have anticipated from the title, or maybe you could have sort of suggested it yourself, but instead of it doing it that way or that way, sorry, people on Zoom, he's pointing like an idiot to the left and the right. Instead of doing it vertically or horizontally, you could combine at an angle. What do you get? Well, you get a different distribution up the top, in the middle, down the bottom. Well, you get a different density, don't you? Why are we bothering to do this? Well, maybe because there's nice aspects of the vertical combining on the left. Maybe I liked the fat tails, but maybe I didn't like the bimodality. Maybe I prefer unimodality, like on the right for horizontal combining. And what you get in the middle, oh look, we got unimodality and we've got relatively fat tails. So you're kind of picking up at least an alternative to the original two on the left and on the right. Okay, just to sort of repeat myself, this is what I'm doing. Perhaps this is a pointless slide. You got the idea. You could combine horizontally, or you could combine vertically, or you could combine, and people on Zoom, this is not working at all, is it? But you could combine at an angle. All right. And actually, if I mention theta, that's the angle I'm combining at, okay? I think in that diagram, theta's about 45 degrees, and it was on the previous slide. Over on the right, it's probably a little bit of a mess, but I thought I'd give you a few examples. Yes, theta being 0 is horizontal combining, and theta being 90 degrees is vertical. So I'm going to arrogantly say that I think, angular encompasses the other two. There we go, done it. I've got in red the density. Should we look at the densities? The density, yeah, but in red you had that on the previous slide. That's the combining at 45 degrees. What about the pink? The pink. I thought the pink was quite interesting, because the pink, look, 88 degrees. You're nearly combining vertically. But if you look down the bottom, can you sort of see the pink dashed lines? That's a line. That's still unimodal. Although out in the tails, it's getting very similar to the vertical combining. All right. Let's still pause a bit on this angular combining. It'd be like me to charge into the empirical and just leave all deep thinking behind. But let's do a little bit of deep thinking. What is this angular combining doing? Well, I've already told you, right? You've got, in this simple little illustration, a couple of Gaussian CDFs, and I'm going to combine at an angle. What does that really involve? Well, I suppose crucial is the points of intersection of that angled line with the two CDFs. That's kind of crucial to the story. And if you're going to average at this angle, I suppose you're averaging the 2 points of intersection. Is it okay if I call one of them x1 with respect to x and the other x2? And then I suppose you've got the corresponding CDF intersection points, F1 and F2. So over here to these analytical expressions, well, that's right, isn't it? Up the top, that's right. The resulting angularly combined distribution, evaluated at the midpoint of the x-axis between those two, x1 and x2, is going to be the average of the intersection values in terms of CDF. Up the top, that's right. That's angular combining. And if you differentiate that with respect to the argument, you get this thing that might look a little bit messy, but it's a little bit interesting. I'll defend it by saying if you put in theta is 0, I think probably it degenerates to being, what's theta 0? Theta 0, I suppose, is horizontal combining. Yeah, it does degenerate to the harmonic averaging. And as theta approaches, probably can't quite get to 90 degrees in terms of tan, but as it approaches 90 degrees, you can see that the last two elements, last element in the numerator, last element in the denominator are going to dominate, and you're going to get arithmetic averaging. So it kind of works. But the interesting thing, I think, a little bit interesting, is what is the speed at which you go from horizontal to vertical combining? Well, it's dictated by theta, of course. Actually, it's dictated by tan theta. And that slightly explains why we had to go to actually beyond 88 degrees with that simple little example before we got really close to the vertical combining. We had to go to at least 88 degrees before we got close. We got rid of that, got rid of the univert modality, and we're getting bimodality. All right, okay, enough of that. Implementation, quite important, but I've already told you how I'm going to implement. What's crucial is that you think about combining at an angle. That line, the intersection points are crucial. And it's a numerical procedure that's required in general, right? You're not going to be able to, I don't think, in general, do this analytically, at least not with my little brain. Okay, this is the implementation. First of all, in essence, this is the implementation. We'll draw a diagonal blue, sounds like a type of cheese or something, diagonal blue line there, okay, and then I'm gonna mark 1,000 equally spaced points on the diagonal blue. Is that all right? Then what are you gonna do? In the middle, through each of those points on diagonal blue, I'm going to have an angled green line. At what angle? Well, for illustration, 70 degrees. 70 degrees. Okay, a green angled line through each of those blue points. Then what am I going to do? Oh, crucially, you've got to find the points of intersection of the each green line with the two CDFs. And that's where the numerical procedure comes in. And then what are we going to do? Bottom right, well, you're obviously, if you're interested in averaging the two, you'll find the midpoint of those green lines, all right? Oh, and how many points have we got? I suppose if there were 1,000 marked points on the diagonal blue, there's going to be 1,000 red dots in the bottom right. Linear interpolation for simplicity, and you got yourself a pretty smooth CDF. So, sorry, hit it with a hammer. It is a numerical procedure. All right, let's charge on. Have I got time to talk about empirical? Unfortunately, loads of time. Okay, so I played with this data, which is obviously the very sad story of COVID-19 mortality, but it's a jolly rich and lovely data set, actually, and it's to credit, let's give some people some credit here. Nick Reich from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. It was his initiative, and I'm sure some people here will be aware of the COVID-19 Forecast Hub. It's got some very nice visualizations on a very miserable theme, obviously. But essentially, during the pandemic, he was inviting people from wherever in the world to submit forecasts for mortality for different locations in the US. All right, and he made the data freely available, so I started playing with it. What is it? The data is CDF forecasts, okay? So that's interesting. Nick is totally behind the idea of probabilistic forecasting. He didn't want point forecasts, he wanted CDF forecasts submitted each week on COVID-19 mortality. He's generalized it, actually. So if you want to use this data, you can use this data, or hospitalizations and cases. He's got forecasts up now for all those things. Anyway, so it's weekly data, and it's for forecasts for 1 to 4 weeks ahead. 52 locations. I think he's even gone to the county level in some of the hub, but I was playing with these 52 locations, one of which is mortality for the whole of the US, and then the other 51, well, the 50 states, and I'll casually refer to the to DC as the 51st state. So these are the locations that I've got forecasts for. Oh yeah, changing set of about 30 teams. It's a little bit messy, because it wasn't always the same 30 teams producing forecasts each week for each location. it's quite a mess in that respect. Okay, but anyway, and I played with a period of 84 weeks. And if I refer to any optimization of parameters, what I did, and it's probably crazy when it comes to sort of optimizing a parameter for distributional forecasting, but I used as little as 10 weeks, I'm afraid. 10 weeks was my first in-sample period, and then I expanded it each week, producing combinations of forecasts. All right, well, I hope that was vaguely clear. Did I say that CDF forecasts are submitted? That was a little lie. Actually, what Nick was inviting teams to do was to submit forecasts of 23 quantiles across the distribution. That was a bit more, I suppose, practical in terms of submitting these things. Well, my study is about distributions, so I just converted these, I hope, uncontroversially into a distribution. And so I linearly interpolated between each of these quantiles, and then just made a simplistic assumption for the endpoints. All right, should we just have a quick look at some of the data? So this was for the last week for New York, mortality forecasts from, and I think I said 30 teams. That was typical, but towards the end of my data set, and this is right at the end, there were just 10 teams in the game for some reason. More recently, there's actually more teams are submitting forecasts. Anyway, these are the CDF forecasts for New York for 1 week ahead, right at the end of the data set. And there they are in gray, the individual CDF forecasts. What have we got in light blue? Vertical averaging. If you look at the 3 colored CDS, not surprising. This is what those guys said in that splendid paper. It's producing, and others have pointed it out, vertical combining is going to give you, it's intuitive, quite a wide distribution. What about horizontal averaging? Potentially too skinny, not sufficiently wide. And then angular averaging, well, you wonder where 79% came from? 79%. Optimized, all right? And all I'm saying with this slide is, look, it's not the same as the others. Yes, angular combining is giving you something between. It's just an alternative, right? Probably should look at some empirical results and realize it doesn't work at all. Well, okay, right. This is a very pretty picture, isn't it? X-axis, try and keep some discipline here. X-axis, this is not really a proper out-of-sample comparison. I mean, it is, but it's assuming a specific angle, right? So what if we assume 0? Right, okay, that's horizontal averaging. And if you 90 degrees, that's vertical averaging. And I'm looking at perhaps if we from the outset had decided to focus on a particular angle. These are the results we would have got. What results? Skill score for an approximation to the CRPS. So skill score, people might be familiar with skill scores. The higher, the better. And it's relative to horizontal averaging. I shouldn't forget to say that. So it's not a big surprise that horizontal averaging is 0% better than horizontal averaging. All right, okay. What about vertical averaging? Well, okay, so we're getting some skill scores that are higher. I think for simplicity, focus on the black. The black is an average across all 52 locations. What's the black saying? Well, it's saying actually, in this particular case, surely not for every case, vertical averaging is better than horizontal averaging. But maybe there's an argument that angular combining at, what you reckon, about 80 degrees is where the black curve peaks. And it's the same story with the other curves, which are basically, I suppose, clusters of these 52 series. In red, I suppose that's an important one. What's that? That's the US, yes, the US as a whole. That's just one series, so yeah, okay. And actually vertical averaging for that one series is the best. All right, okay. But there seems to be potential for angular combining there. But really, in any sort of serious study, we should think about, could you optimize the parameter? What parameter? The angle theta. And this is the result. This is a histogram of the optimized angle for the different forecast origins for the different locations, for 52 locations. I chucked them onto one histogram, right? And what you can see is, well, okay, maybe you're seeing a bit of everything, but you're seeing more vertical averaging being optimized than horizontal averaging. And actually, well, actually, rather than vertical averaging, actually what came up far more often was values just a bit below for that angle theta. All right, okay. Just a couple more slides on the empirical results. X-axis, the 52 different locations, ordered according to the severity of how COVID mortality hit that location, number of deaths. So not surprising, perhaps the US as a whole is at the extreme left, followed by California, Texas, Florida, New York, small font, sorry about that. And on the y-axis, skill score again, skill score. No surprise that in dark blue, 0 skill score for horizontal averaging because it can't beat itself. So that's the benchmark in the skill score. And then in light blue, if you can sort of see light blue, it's generally better than horizontal, I guess. And the red seems to be angular averaging is dominating the 2. It's on top of the 2. If I've got 30 seconds extra, this actually worried me. I kind of think maybe, I was thinking maybe angular averaging is simply switching between the 2. That's all that's going on. It's essentially just switching between 0 degrees and 90 degrees, and that's why it's better than either. But it's not better than both, ever. It's just the better of the 2. So I was interested to look out in the tails. So this is no longer CRPS, this is the 95% interval score. And I thought this was quite interesting and perhaps very obvious to the experts in the room in this area. Vertical combining, vertical averaging, and doesn't it give you a very potentially, they say, overly wide distribution? And that's coming out in this plot that vertical averaging, when it comes to the 95% interval forecasting, is not really at the races. Horizontal averaging would be better. And what I was pleased to see was that I haven't got any more angular averaging just being equal to the better of the 2. It seems to be different. It seems to be different and overall a little bit better than the 2. All right, okay. Final slide. Unfortunately, 5 minutes left for questions. We don't need to spend the time on questions. Angular combining is an alternative. I'm trying to read the slides. What do I put up there? Apparently it's an alternative to vertical and horizontal combining. And I've shown you the results, the ideas here for averaging, but of course, you don't have to just average on that angle. You could do a weighted average. So I suppose if it's weighting this CDF more, then I suppose you'd be closer. So I've done that as well. Performance-based weighted averaging on an angle. That's it. There's really no need for questions. The rule is, if you ask questions, they must be very easy. Oh dear, here we go.
So I wonder if you could articulate for me in terms that you could explain to a user
Probably not.
what it is that you are averaging. It's easy to explain the nature of the averaging for the vertical and the horizontal because you're fixed quantities or fixed quantile, but what exactly it is that this angular procedure averages?
You're saying it's easy with horizontal because you're going to give the story about it averaging quantiles, and that a vertical is averaging probabilities. I suppose I'm a visual person, so I'm comfortable with it because I'm thinking with the picture. But what is it in words? Well, it's neither of those. It's something between the 2. And it potentially has the ability to be capturing the worst of the 2, but it potentially can capture the better of the 2. I mean, what I should have said, and to be honest, from the outset, was that I may have mentioned at one point I'm an empirical person. That was how I charged into this. I thought that paper by those guys was really interesting. Is it better to combine horizontally or vertically, they were asking. And I thought they had their kind of theoretical discussions. I thought, it's jolly interesting. But ultimately, it seemed to me to be an empirical question. So that's all I'm doing, really, rightly or wrongly. I'm throwing something else into the mix, which actually, if you've got enough data to optimize the angle, it could be said encompasses the other 2. But I mean, it's not very subtle. So when I say encompasses, it sounds very bold. It's just a little alternative. Yeah. So that was a very waffly answer that didn't really answer your question at all. So grab the micro. Still on.
Thank you very much. I really liked your talk. One question, or one thing I found really interesting is, because you have the tangents in there, it's the very top end where you only get close to the horizontal averaging, and otherwise you...
Yeah, the very top end you get close to vertical
averaging. And otherwise you're very close to the horizontal. Have you thought of a different way of, let's call it a weighted average between horizontal and vertical that will even it out maybe a little bit more, and so... I don't know if that's possible.
I think, to be honest, I don't think I focused enough on those expressions. It was only really, actually, it's something very useful about preparing a presentation. You sort of think, well, I might, and actually it was presenting to my friend Saib at the back there. I suddenly thought, I ought to have a little bit more to say about these. And I thought they're jolly interesting. This tan theta is controlling the speed of the change. So there probably are cunning things to think about. Let's change it to cos theta. Whoa, what's that doing? I don't know. But actually my angle of attack from the outset was more what I was hinting at the beginning. I saw arithmetic averaging. On the next slide, I saw harmonic averaging. And I thought, well, there are others. And we know there's geometric averaging, and that's been used. But actually, careful, that's been used in a vertical sense, right? For a given x. So that sends me back to vertical averaging, doesn't it? What I want is something that... Can I grab that? Questions? All right, we're not going past past. Don't worry about that. I'm heading for the hills.
Okay, thank you very much for your very nice talk. My question is whether you have any intuition about the value of the angle, that why a certain angle could work better than another, and whether in your experiments the optimal angle was rather stable or it was fluctuating between experiments.
Well, you could see, I showed you the histogram of the optimized angle. It was fluctuating because in this, and I suppose the next thing to do would be another natural home for me is to play with financial data, daily data, 2,000 observations. Then we might be able to optimize the angle with a little bit more confidence. But here, yeah, I mean, I was using as small a sample as 10 observations. So it was fluctuating, to be honest. What was the other thing you said there about?
Whether you have an intuition?
Well, this is where I end up referring over to Casey and the co-authors with their paper. They're giving a sort of intuition, an argument for when horizontal might be better than vertical. And I think all I'm going to end up doing is repeat their discussion. I'm doing neither, but I'm probably, has it come out at 89%? I'm doing close to vertical. And I go to his paper for the arguments. A bit weak, wasn't that? Don't give the microphone to Johanna, because she's just going to ask very, very tricky questions.
Well, thank you very much for your talk. What I was wondering is, the horizontal and vertical both work really nice when you have univariate densities, right? But
yeah. What does it mean?
The vertical continues to work if you go to a multivariate density.
What does horizontal even mean in multivariate?
Yeah.
Good point. Don't know. Next question.
Excellent.
No, I mean, I via Saib and our other friend Zarshan, we love the multivariate world. So probably we should be thinking, if you're combining quantiles, then we got to kind of define a multivariate quantile. So then we're talking level sets, I guess, yeah? Level sets, and then we got to somehow combine. We could do that. Can we do that? Yeah, we could do that in a horizontal sense. And then could we do it as an angle? Perhaps.
But I actually think if you go the other way around, I think your angular method may generalize fairly well to a multivariate setting without you having to think first about defining multivariate quantiles.
Why?
Because when you look at your angle, what you said before about the geometric mean, where you say you stay in some sense horizontal, right? What you are not doing, you don't stay horizontal. You kind of perturb the x-axis so that you look at this angle, right? So that in multivariate, that would mean you have to perturb the space at which you're looking at your combination.
That's right. I'd have to define it carefully, wouldn't I? Because I don't know whether I'm coming up at that angle or that angle, but you just have to define it. Yeah.
It's just
well, okay, that's very interesting. Wouldn't have been my reaction, and we thought about it, the multivariate. Oh no, hey, I can't even define it. Yeah. Thank you, Joanna. Can we leave? Can we finish that? I'm not running away. Happy to sort of argue my case, but let's finish there. And can we thank, I've actually two things to say. One is, can we thank at least the first two speakers? So thank you very much to them. And sorry, Samine, but the middle speaker was a student. And there is a prize for the best student presentation. It would be great if that prize went to the student in this session. The middle presentation was by a student, Samine. Please vote. Figure it out on the app. I think if you find her, it's rate the presentation. Don't for goodness sake rate David or me, we're far too long in the tooth for that. You've got little stars there. Give her a 3-star. And we'll split the money, Samine. Okay, all right, thanks. See you later.